Okay. Oops. So let's talk about why, right? Why is infrastructure as service a big thing right now? Jesse mentioned that it's the fastest growing portion of IT, and he's absolutely 100% correct on that. Fastest growing portion of IT across every single facet, right? And why? It's because it does have agility, and it does have scalability where you can easily scale up or scale down in most cases within half an hour or less, right? If you have a retail business and you need to be able to go ahead and be ready for holiday shopping season or back to school shopping season or whatever it happens to be, right? You can certainly go ahead and scale up as needed, and then when you're done with it, you just scale back down to whatever your regular level set is. If you run a business that doesn't have a lot of business going on right now, but is all summertime based, and those types of things, you need more resources during the summer. You don't need them in the winter. Again, scale up, scale down as necessary, and that kind of gives you the ability to kind of keep your costs down when you're not at full capacity workload. So, it also gives you a lower entry level barrier, specifically along the lines of the fact that you're only paying month to month. You don't have to shell out the $100,000 for some hardware and things like that initially. Maybe you can do it for $5,000 a month to start or something like that. Typically, $5,000 is a lot easier pill to swallow than $100,000 immediately or whatever. It keeps cash flow going and all of that type of stuff as well. So it makes it a lot easier to get in. Plus, typically, since the contracts are much smaller, it also gives you the opportunity, if it's not the right fit, then that's okay too. So I mentioned earlier the utility style billing, where it's billed just like your electricity bill is. Each unit is given a dollar value, and then based off of how much you actually use, that's how they compute what you have. And a lot of people use it if you do testing, if you do software engineering or writing software and those types of things, and you want to go ahead and do some development or testing and things like that. They give you the opportunity to have all of those types of services and pay for them only when you're using them. And then when you're done, you can literally just shut it off. You don't have to worry about buying hardware to do testing and those types of things. You can literally just pay for it for a short period of time that test is going to be. And then I always bring up the idea of increased productivity. And by increased productivity, what I mean is there are SLAs for uptime and things like that that providers offer, as well as the ability that you can go ahead and, anywhere that you are, you can certainly pull out your mobile device or whatever it happens to be and work. Right? It's not a situation where you have to be in an office anymore. It's not a spot where you have to be connected, from an actual hardwire piece or anything like that. As long as you have some type of connection, you can work is really what it works out to. So we see a lot of increased productivity because of that. The other thing is, because of SLAs, there is a lot less downtime. If there's a break of if something goes bad, a drive fails or something like that, that's not necessarily on you any longer. That's on the provider, and Microsoft in this case. So there's a lot more productivity that comes from our customers that go to Azure. So let's talk about the separation of responsibilities. This is kind of where it kind of gets interesting, at least from my standpoint. Right? If you buy on premises, this is what you have to be responsible for. So if you buy a piece of hardware, you have to be responsible for the networking, the storage, the actual hardware server piece, the virtualization level if you're doing virtualization, including any of the data and applications that sit on that operating system and everything like that. If you do infrastructure as a service, the provider manages the virtualization, the servers, the storage, the networking underneath everything, and you as the customer are only responsible for the operating system and above. You're still responsible for the applications. With the operating system, you're still responsible for patching and all of those types of things, but you're not responsible for, like, if the drive fails. You're not responsible for how much CPU and RAM are there and if they're operating properly or anything like that. You don't have to worry about technology refresh anymore because all of these companies take that into consideration for you. And then there's what we call platform as a service. This is like, if you ever hear about people doing SQL as a service or those types of things, all you have to be responsible for is the applications and data, and then the provider is going to cover everything underneath. And then there's what we call software as a service, and this is something like Office 365, where the provider manages everything, even the application, the data, and all you have to do is show up and use it. So here's my analogy, right? I use this as pizza as a service. If you do on-prem, it is more like what you would consider make-it-home pizza, meaning you have to provide everything. You have to provide the dough, you have to provide the sauce, the toppings, you have to provide the oven and the electricity or gas to run it, you have to provide the table, drinks, all of that type of stuff in this case. So this is more what traditional on-prem is. When you do infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, it's more like going to the grocery store and getting a pre-made pizza and bring it home and baking it yourself. Somebody is making the dough, somebody is actually providing the sauce, the toppings, all that type of stuff for you, but you still have to provide a little bit. And that little bit in this analogy is you have to have the table, drinks, you still have to provide the oven and the electricity or gas to run that oven, and so on and so forth, right? So there is a dividing line as far as the separation of responsibilities in this case. If you do something like platform as a service, this is like getting pizza delivered, right? Somebody is making the pizza for you with their own electricity and their own ovens. They're making the dough, they're providing the pizza toppings and sauce and all that stuff. All you have to have is a place to sit and something to drink at that point. And then there's software as a service, and this is literally going out for pizza. Somebody else provides you and brings you all of these things directly. They give you the table, they provide the drinks for you, they make it, they provide all the toppings and everything else that goes along with pizza. And so in that case, they are covering all of these things. So when we talk about these things, this is kind of the analogy that I think takes care of everything and who manages what. And that's really where infrastructure as a service changes things for our customers. Now, this slide is extremely busy, and I'm going to apologize up front because I hate busy slides typically, but it tells the story. Most people think about Azure as a platform where you can get things like virtual machines, storage, a couple of other things that go along with it, right? Networking, some security things, Active Directory, whatever it happens to be. There are almost 70 different resources, or if you want to call them actual products, as part of the Azure platform, all listed here, right? And some of them are pretty simple to understand, right? There's virtual machines, there's scale sets of virtual machines. There's one that just came out that's not even in here yet. It's called Windows Virtual Desktop, which is a virtual desktop infrastructure solution, or VDI type solution. There is VPN gateways and load balancing and all of that type of stuff as well. And there is storage and all of that, but there's a lot of other things. So like if you're into IoT, there's definitely those types of things. There's also machine learning and business intelligence types of things down here. So it's more than just infrastructure. It is a ton more of products that exist that kind of add on to infrastructure. Infrastructure is the underlying piece of it, but it is so much more. If you want to build chatbots for, specific websites or things like that, you can use the technology that is in Azure to do that. If you do things with big data and warehousing and those types of things, you can certainly go ahead and use those types of things as well. So it's more than just virtual machines, storage, networking, but that's what most people tend to think. But that's why this slide's a little bit busy. So let's talk about some pain points that we see customers having. And there are some. There definitely are, right? I've made some overall investments in my hardware, right? I spent $200,000 last year on brand new hardware. What do I do, right? So I'm going to tell you that in a lot of cases, that's fantastic that you did that, and you can certainly wait out that hardware refresh time. But if things fill up, let's say you bought 10 servers or whatever it happens to be, and you've certainly filled all that up, you can certainly create a hybrid model solution where some stays on premises and some moves over into Azure as you do start to fill up. You can also do things where, you know, the new stuff is going to go to Azure, the old stuff stays on premises, and as that new stuff, or as that old stuff starts to kind of go to the point where you are, where it's time to refresh and whatever, then you very slowly start to move over and those types of things. So just because you've made investments doesn't necessarily mean you can't move to Azure, but at the same time, would never say just abandon, $100,000, $200,000 of investment that you made, 6 months ago or whatever. But there are options that you have. Now, if you are at hardware refresh time, it's a fantastic time to have the conversation because you're probably going to be making a decision very soon anyway. So it's a great time to have that conversation. I get this all the time, right? I just don't have the expertise to deploy Azure. Well, that's fine. Just because you don't doesn't mean that we don't. And we do. We have experts who can certainly do this all the time for you. And the thing that we would want to talk to you about is let's look at what you have and let's talk about, from a consultation standpoint, what it's going to look like in Azure, what our team can do for you, how we can maximize what your spend is going to be and make it very streamlined so that when you do start to deploy Azure, obviously your costs are contained and streamlined, but at the same time, use our expertise in those types of things. You do not have to have that expertise. We will provide that for you. It's a capital expenditure versus an operational expenditure. Get this a lot, right? This is the idea of paying month to month versus paying full upfront. There are a lot of reasons why you would probably want to have more of a capital expenditure, meaning month to month as opposed to a full operational expenditure. It's much better on cash flow, right? You can budget it a lot better. Typically, if you say it's going to cost me $1,000 each month, and I can just put that into my budget on a month-to-month basis, and it's just like paying your electricity bill or just like paying your phone bill or whatever it happens to be and how you're running your business. It's just an extra monthly bill that comes in as opposed to having to worry about it in one lump sum. I do understand that, there are certain industries that have, budget times and all of that type of stuff. There are certain things that there are certain things that are
getting a little background noise. Yeah, I was just going to ask if you don't mind muting out. There's a few of you out there, but thank you guys. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Yeah, no, not a problem at all. So there are a lot of industries that prefer to do budgeting, once a year, right, whenever the beginning of that fiscal year happens to be, and all of that. And that's perfectly fine. You can still operate in Azure if you are in one of those types of industries, but a lot of times it just tends to be easier to pay month to month and kind of budget it that way, as opposed to not. So that's one of the big things that we tend to see. The other thing, and this is kind of interesting, I call this the stagnation of technology advancements, right? And so what I mean by that is you cannot take advantage of the newest advancements in technology because what you are currently working with just is not up to par. I'll give you a real quick example, right? My wife, love her to death, she, up until 2 weeks ago, had an original iPhone 6. Not the 6S or anything like that, an original iPhone 6. And she complained that, she went and got a Fitbit and a bunch of other things, right? And Fitbit has a specific app and all of that type of stuff to track and all of those. And because her iPhone was so old, she couldn't install the app onto her phone to be able to track her steps and her other activity and all of that type of stuff. So because her technology was not current, she couldn't take advantage of that advancement and things like that. And there are other things that existed as well, right? But if you're in a situation where you're running hardware that's 4, 5, maybe even older than that from a year standpoint, maybe you can't take advantage of everything that's out there in today's market. And especially, if you do things with IoT or anything along those lines, it's certainly a situation where when you do move to infrastructure as a service, they make sure that you are on the newest, latest, greatest pieces of hardware, the fastest versions of RAM that you can possibly get, and the best processors that you can possibly get. And IaaS companies like Microsoft spend billions of dollars a year in hardware refreshes and updating their data centers and all of those types of things to make sure that that is the case. Most of the infrastructure as a service companies usually change out their hardware every 2 years at the maximum. Okay, so most on-prem, 3 to 5. So you can easily see how you could take advantage of the newest, latest, greatest, because you're always on the newest, latest, greatest. That also goes with things like operating systems as well, right? If you're running Windows Server 2008 currently, which just went end of support, then there are certain things that just are not being made anymore to run on Windows Server 2008. They're all made on for the newest, latest, greatest, 2016, 2019. When you buy Azure Operating, newest, latest, greatest as far as that goes too. So it's definitely a situation where you want to make sure that you can take advantage of every single thing that is available to everybody. One of the things that I hear most, and this is probably the most common of the overall conversation pieces that I have, is security, right? A lot of people say, well, you know what, it's just not, the cloud is just not secure. I had a customer come to me the other day and try to tell me that his Office 365 was not a secure spot. And I had to say, it is. It's significantly more secure than anything that you could build on premises. Companies like Microsoft spend multi-millions of dollars a year, hundreds of millions of dollars a year for things like physical security for their data centers, as well as cybersecurity for their data centers. There is all types of protection, and what they put into place is something that is significantly better than what you could put on premises any day, anytime, because they're investing multi-millions of dollars every single year in making sure that they are as secure as they possibly can. Now, I will say that our partners do go through and bring their own security pieces as well. So you create a layered security look in an Azure data center. So you bring your own firewall and endpoint protection, and you let what Microsoft has as well, and you layer it. And once you layer it really, really well, you are extremely secure. So the biggest thing that I always say is you're going to be more secure as long as you bring your own options and things like that in a public cloud data center than anything that you could build on premises, and that all has to do with the layers idea. So if security is a question, we're more than happy to have that conversation with you, but at the same time, understand that they are extremely secure. Poor connectivity and poor accessibility. You understand that there are a lot of issues with in some rural areas and things like that. Connectivity tends to be rather poor in some cases, and I understand that it is getting better in a lot of the parts of the country, but at the same time, it is a concern. And one of those concerns, it's easy to kind of think about the fact that you can connect with just a regular, mobile device or whatever it happens to be off of a regular 4G connection or anything like that. What I always tell customers is as long as you have a minimum of 50 megabits per second of overall connectivity, you can easily run in Azure. And like here at my house, I have 100 megabits per second of connectivity on a regular basis, and that's at my own house. I don't have a business plan or anything like that. So you do start to see those types of things start to go out the window. But if it is a connectivity issue, there are other options out there as well, in ways that you can connect to make it a little bit faster by using things like RDS or those types of things. And again, more than happy to have those conversations with you. Other challenges that we tend to see. The second biggest conversation that I have with customers is, I said security is the first one. Cost optimization and cost control tends to be the next biggest conversation piece that I see in the market. By that, what I mean is I'll have customers come to me and say, I've already went to Microsoft, I've purchased it with a credit card, but I think I'm spending way too much. I don't know I'm spending way too much, but I think my costs are just absolutely out of control, and I don't know how to, put a clamp on it, right? So there's a couple of pieces there. Number one is going to be things like governance, right? Who's doing what inside that portal to see where that's actually going. The other thing is, as I mentioned before, I'm spending way too much, and I don't know if it is a situation where I can, reduce my costs. And there are tools that exist out there. We use a tool called Cloud Checker, and Cloud Checker will help with these types of things. They'll show where you can actually, and we can do these for you, where you can actually save costs, how you can optimize that spend, and all of those types of things. Sometimes it's just as simple as turning it off on nights and weekends if you don't work nights and weekends. If you're a regular Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 type of business, and you're not working at 2 in the morning on a random Wednesday, then don't pay for services at 2 in the morning on a random Wednesday, right? And those types of things. So we have ways to help you with that as part of our services offerings for you. So don't worry if you think that costs are just way out of control. We can definitely help that for you. Overall management of the environment. I've created this environment. It's a virtual environment somewhere. I'm not 100% sure where it is, right? Because Microsoft doesn't publish the exact locations of their data centers. They just say it's, in the East US, which happens to be in Virginia or whatever. But I don't know how to manage it. Well, let us do that management for you. We have managed services that we can offer you that will definitely go through and help you with managing your environment. We can show you different things and all of that. So, don't let that scare you away, right? That's a big challenge, but we can easily overcome that for you. And as I mentioned before, some services are still necessary for you. You have to have certain things like backup and disaster recovery and security and those types of things. But again, we have these tools in place to help you. Azure is not natively backed up. If somebody tells you that it is, they're lying to you. They do have a program called Azure Backup, but there are also other services out there in the market as well that may have better functionality and those types of things, but you do still have to protect your data. You do still have to have a DR plan in place. You do still have to have security, VPN connectivity or a secure connection, and all of those types of things in place as well. So there are some things that still have to happen from your standpoint as a customer to make sure that you're taking full advantage of what Microsoft gives you. The other thing that I mentioned earlier, security and governance, right? One of the biggest features is it a secure environment? And as I said before, it is, but you do have to provide different things from your standpoint as far as who can do what and all of that. And from a governance standpoint, it's really all about who's doing what and where. Are you meeting different compliances and all of those types of things? If you are in a compliance-related industry, you can certainly go through and Microsoft publishes something called their trust site. Just to kind of give you an idea, all of Microsoft's current commercial level data centers meet what they call FedRAMP certification at the low levels. And FedRAMP certification means that it can house high-level federal government 3-letter agency data. It also meets HIPAA, CRJ, all of the financial institution requirements and all of that type of stuff from a security standpoint. So it's a situation where by moving to Azure, you can get all of your compliance, governance, all of that type of stuff well. So don't be concerned when you say, oh, I have to have a certain type of compliance because I run a bank or I run a hospital or whatever it happens to be. Azure can definitely meet all of those, and there are published pieces out there, published paperwork out there that we can provide you that will show you all of the different compliances and things like that that Microsoft meets. So real quickly, how do I know if Microsoft Azure is the thing for me? And this is a great big topic, and I'm going to try to narrow it down to a couple of different statements. We always recommend that the first step for you is to perform an assessment. Okay? And by perform an assessment, what I mean is that
I think somebody muted our speaker accidentally. Our speaker was dialed in on the phone. I think where Steve's going on the assessment side, guys, and I can continue with this for a second while we unmute him, is that you have to kind of know where you're coming from. And so what I mean by that is, oh yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
That was me. So nonetheless, performing an assessment is really knowing what you're doing, right? Have an actual plan in place. Have get somebody to go through and look at what you have. As I talked about before, one of the big things is people are spending way too much when they provision on-prem or over-provisioned. Make sure you have that streamlined down. If you have a couple of virtual machines that all have 8 CPUs and 64 gig of RAM, but you're only using half of that, then only pay for half of that when you do move over into Azure, because you're paying for all of those specific resources. So in that case, that's where an assessment comes into play. It will scan your environment and tell you what is being consumed, what is not, so you can certainly streamline that and make a very educated decision as to what your costs would look like in Azure, as well as if it's a good fit. And then that's part of the consultation piece after the assessment, right? We'll sit down with you and we'll say, this is where we're going, this is what we found, this is what we think your costs are going to look like, this is what our services would look like to get you there, and then move on from there. So an assessment is not necessarily a statement of I am moving to Azure. It is the first step in the overall process of decision making before I move to Azure. So we always recommend a good, solid network assessment and then make educated decisions based on what we're talking about. The other thing is, and Jesse brought this up earlier as well, start small, right? You don't necessarily have to move, 50 virtual machines and, 100 terabytes of data on the back end and, all that type of stuff if you don't want to. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you want to, you certainly can, and we'll help make that happen for you every step of the way. But at the same time, go ahead and start small. Move some backup data in there. Move some DR or your Active Directory or things like that. It's literally dipping your toe into the water to see how it is, right? Does it perform how you want it to perform? Are you seeing connectivity issues? Are you seeing any other major issues or things like that as you start to move forward? So start small. And then you can start to build out, right? A lot of people, honestly, start with Office 365 because Office 365 is hosted in Azure. So if you are already using Office 365, then guess what? You have already seen what Azure performance kind of looks like because that's where it's hosted out of. So if you're seeing performance issues there, you may continue to see performance issues. If you're not seeing performance issues, and I'll be honest, I don't talk to very many people who have performance issues around Office 365, but if you are or not, you should see the same type of thing through moving things over into Azure as well. So easy to start small and then kind of expand from there, right? Common starting points, right? I mentioned before, first thing is going to be to go through and do some type of network assessment, have our team scan your environment, Let's have a conversation afterwards from a consultation standpoint as to what it's going to look like, what the costs are going to be, and those types of things, right? And then let's go through and do some optimization, and let's start to move things over, right? So that's kind of going to be it from that standpoint of where you're going to start. Next steps, as I mentioned before, is going to be a network assessment. My ask to everybody on the call is to contact your Katalyst sales rep and schedule a cloud assessment today. Have our team do it, and then have that post-assessment conversation with, is this the right move for me and my business, and why, or maybe why not? I mean, there's no, I'll be 100% honest with you. There's no guarantee it is, but with the way that the industry is growing, it's more and more and more popular, right? If you are new to Katalyst or you aren't sure who your Katalyst sales rep is, you can certainly email this, sales@katalystng.com, and the rep will reach out to you to schedule that network assessment or that initial conversation, whichever it happens to be. With that, I think I hit 45 minutes, close. What questions that we can answer for people? And thank you for your time, by the way. I appreciate everybody's time this morning, as I mentioned earlier.
Steve, getting a question in the chat here on the WebEx.
Okay.
What are the, okay, so this may be a little difficult for you to answer. What kind of cost would we expect to run just a few servers in Azure if we wanted to extend Active Directory?
Good question. Almost impossible to answer without seeing what type of resources are already there. That's why, as I mentioned before, the network assessment is a very, very, very good idea because a network assessment will tell us what you have currently. My assumption is when you say you're running Active Directory or extending Active Directory, it's already on premises. Is that I'm going to assume, a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, so doing that network assessment will tell us what you have currently already existing on-prem, as well as what is being consumed off of that, and then we can give you a better idea. It's hard to say. A lot of it depends on how many users and those types of things, what type of resources are needed, and all of that. So it's not an exact science that it's automatically going to cost you $200 a month or whatever it happens to be. It's really more about, let's look at it, let's scan it, let's talk about it, and then we can get you a much better idea as far as what those resources would be. Plus, it's also going to have to do with if you have anything other than Active Directory, right? We're going to have to talk about what resources are being consumed by those other applications or whatever too.
Okay, good answer. I've got another one in the chat.
Sure.
Can you share a little bit about how the Azure licensing model works? So lots of our customers are traditional on-premise, and they're consuming, different data center licenses or SQL licenses or whatever. How does that work in the Azure side? Do they still buy those? Do they rent them? What happens?
Yeah, so you can. You can do all of those, as a matter of fact. If you have your own licensing that has software assurance already on it, you can bring your own licensing and save a very, very good chunk of money. Because Microsoft will rent you the license on a month-to-month basis, but they do charge, I don't want to say the words heavily, but they do charge a pretty significant amount. So if you have your own license, you can certainly do that and bring that with you. If you don't have your own license with software assurance on it and you just have a regular on-prem license, unfortunately, you cannot buy that. You cannot bring that into Azure. But there are other options. You can rent it through Microsoft on a month-to-month basis, and that month-to-month basis is metered just like the everything else is, right? So the virtual machines have a specific amount of CPU and RAM and those types of things, and that correlates out to an hourly cost, and then they just add that up based on how many hours you use it. Well, the operating systems are done the exact same way, and then it's based on how many hours you use it. So you can rent it from Microsoft for the month and keep moving forward, or Microsoft has something called the software subscription, and that is a situation where you can purchase the operating system upfront for either a year or 3 years. It does have software assurance attached to it, and then you can use that in Azure as well. So there's a couple of options, but the real big thing is if you have software assurance, you are more than welcome to bring your current licensing model with you.
Okay, thank you. We have another question, and again, if you are on the audio and you'd like to ask, please feel free. But if not, I'll go ahead and ask this one. How long does one of these cloud assessments, cloud readiness assessments, usually take? Obviously, that's dependent on the side, Steve, but can you give us a little insight there?
Yeah, so typically most of the assessment tools that exist out there, usually somewhere in the neighborhood of anywhere between 1 to 3 weeks. Some can be faster, some just take a snapshot in time and those types of things. What I always say is a really good network assessment is something that you want to scan for a period of time so it can see more than just a small snapshot, right? You want to see actual work being done. You want to see, not what's happening at 11 a.m. on Thursday, 13th of February. I think that's what today is. You want to see what is happening over the course of a period of time so you can get a much better idea of how work is happening, right? Today may be a slow day at your office, but tomorrow, being Friday, might be a super busy day, and you want to be able to take that into consideration. I mentioned earlier that if you have a business that is seasonal, right? You hire seasonal people for the summer or for the winter or whatever it happens to be. Maybe it's better to perform that assessment at a time where you're going to see that jump in resources or whatever. Typically, anywhere between 1 and 3 weeks is a good scan time. Some scan longer, some scan less, but usually we'll even go in between there. 2 weeks, give or take. Something along those lines, and then obviously the conversation afterwards is a different point too. But.
Good to know. Another question that's come in, which I do think is very interesting, and I appreciate the ask, is I'm on-premise VMware today. Can I run my VMs on that hypervisor in Azure?
It's a great question. So I'm going to answer this in 2 different ways. Number one, if you are on-premise on VMware, Azure they've partnered with a company called Cloud Simple, and the Cloud Simple piece allows you to run native VMware virtual machines and native VMware tools that go with that. Think about Site Recovery Manager, vMotion, etc., and all of that. And they give you the ability to buy through the Cloud Simple what we're going to call hardware nodes where you can run your native VMware. The catch is that it is a larger opportunity. You have to buy a minimum of 3 nodes. Typically, each of the nodes, hardware nodes, house anywhere between about 50 virtual machines, give or take, and whatever. So they want that to be like 150 virtual machines or more before they'll even start that piece. If you do not have 150 virtual machines or more in Azure, they will not allow you to run native VMware. But Microsoft owns Hyper-V. Azure is built on Hyper-V technology, but through Azure Site Recovery, it has a tool that will convert the VMDK file over into a VHD file, so it will run automatically in a Hyper-V environment for you. I do understand that you have made an investment in VMware tools and all of that, and totally respect that, but unfortunately, those are the 2 options that you have. So the answer is sort of.
Thank you for clarifying that, and great question from the audience. Thank you for submitting
Absolutely. Yeah. Are there any other questions on the chat at this point?
Got one more. This
Okay.
is an easy one for you. We understand the assessment time is 1 to 2 weeks. What do I need to provide Katalyst to do that?
Literally, it's just you have to provide the Katalyst team. We just need the sign off, right? We just have to install an agent in your environment to scan. And from there, you can literally just kind of sit back, and then after the assessment time is over, the scans are over, we'll contact you to have a consultation about what we found, put together a little, deliverable, if you will, right? And then talk about what the next steps would look like and what costs would look like and all of that type of stuff.
Okay, great. One more question.
Hey, I had one too, Jesse.
Great, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was double muted before. Do you have any tips on getting prospects to gather their current cost information? Because when we sit down, I'm sure we're going to want to do a comparison to what they're currently paying and all of that. And I'm imagining that scenario and seeing my, my peer, my fellow IT admin guy, scrambling to try to find that information and, get all that together so we can make a good comparison. Have you seen a lot of that, or what's your advice around that?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely, so here's my advice, and it's a great question, by the way. My advice there is to, just because of what your costs look like today, isn't necessarily an apples to apples comparison. And here's what I mean by that. When you buy a piece of hardware, right, you have a cost associated with that piece of hardware, but there's also what I call ancillary costs that are going to go out the window if you were to move into Azure. So to make an apples to apples comparison, you have to look at the cost of the hardware and what that looks like currently. You also have to look at some of the other pieces there. How much did you pay in break fix costs last year? How much did you pay for if you're in a co-location space, right? And we did that for you. How much did you pay for that? How much are you paying if you're housing it on premises? How much did you pay for electricity and redundant power connections for that particular server? How much did you pay to either heat or cool the room that it's in? And if it is in a room and it's an office in your an extra office or something like that, how much is that floor space worth to you? And could you actually hire another person and put them into that space? And what does that cost look like from your standpoint too? So it has to be an apples to apples comparison. If you look at just the cost of the hardware versus what the cost in Azure looks like, it's not a very true comparison. So you have to make an apples to apples comparison with all the other ancillary things that go into it as well. The other thing
that's a good point. Without just considering compute costs and all that, there's a maintenance costs and all that. So
yeah. And the other thing that I'm going to point out is what I talked about earlier with the fact that hardware deterioration over time. There's another cost associated with hardware refresh again, and all of that type of stuff as things start to get outdated. How much is it that you can't access because your technology is outdated? And the other thing is, with Azure, you're never going to be outdated. They're updating so quickly, hardware and stuff like that, that you will never get into that situation. But you also have to take into consideration what's downtime cost. If a drive fails currently in your piece of hardware that you have, how long does it take you to get back up and running properly? Things like that, and what does that time look like from a lost standpoint, a lost revenue standpoint for your business? In Microsoft world, you can have that drive back up in a matter of minutes. If you need additional resources, again, a matter of minutes. What does that cost look like from your standpoint as well?
Good feedback, Steve. I have one more coming in, and then we'll probably go ahead. We have just a couple minutes left.
Yeah.
This one is an interesting one. I'm a current Meraki customer, and I connect to the internet at my corporate location. How do I get to Azure? Is it VPN only? And I'm going to let Mike Talbert here from the Charlotte team answer that one.
Sure.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question, and I'm going to pull a Steve here, right, and say it really depends, right? So there's definitely a lot of different options and ways to connect into Azure, right, from an on-premise or from all your different locations. So a lot of that really depends on, you know, how much data needs to be supported within that pipe. There is a limitation on the Azure side from a public internet perspective. So there's only so much bandwidth you can push through a VPN connection. In a lot of instances, that is definitely more than sufficient for a lot of customers. There's also other more direct connect ways through, you know, through the use of express routes and things like that that you can get from ISPs or partnering with somebody like Equinix, right, and even housing your own hardware in their data centers and basically plugging you directly into, you know, into Azure if you needed, you know, more than, you know, 1 gig or maybe 5 gig or even 10 gig connectivity into, you know, the cloud environment. There's a lot of different solutions out there as well. So from a Meraki perspective, they do have, you know, their MX appliances as an option within the Azure environment. So you could definitely spin, you know, one of those up as your WAN edge within Azure, and then do things like, you know, SD-WAN or site-to-site VPNs or things like that. A lot of that information and how we would design that would really be based around, you know, the assessment. But there are definitely multiple different ways to connect.
Thanks, Mike, for that answer. Last thing I just wanted to kind of leave the audience with, and it is really twofold. First is, Steve, thank you again for your time this morning. I thought it was very insightful for the whole community and audience. And then the second is, as you guys are looking to continue your own digital transformation, again, please reach out. We have plenty of resources to help you navigate through that. But don't think of Azure or IaaS as just a single component. As Steve alluded to earlier, there's many, many offerings, and as you guys think of how you're going to wind in things like your application presentation, your load balancing, all of these things that you're doing organically today on-premise, all of those solutions are resident in the platform, and that's one of the things that we've been helping customers with. So again, there's no right size, there's no too small, too large for this. It's really agnostic, and so if you are interested, please don't hesitate to reach out, and if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and close the call. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, everybody.